silent screams, where whispers guide you through the unknown. Tonight, we delve into the unsettling tale of the Victorian doll. Prepare to lose yourself in a world where every creak, every shadow, and every whisper carries a story of its own. The attic was the kind you only see in old houses, dusty, forgotten, and heavy with the weight of time. I wasn't supposed to be up there, not really. My grandmother had always said the attic was off limits, but curiosity had its claws in me. The moment her voice softened with that peculiar fear, telling me to stay away from the doll, I knew I had to see it for myself. The air felt wrong the second I opened the creaking door. A damp, musty smell greeted me, like old wood left to rot in the dark. It was dim, but not completely dark. Shafts of pale light pierced through the slats in the boarded-up window, illuminating motes of dust that floated like lazy spirits. I stepped inside, the wooden boards groaning under my feet, and scanned the room. At first, it seemed ordinary enough. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, old furniture leaned against the walls, and a cracked mirror reflected the ghostly outline of my silhouette. Then I saw it. The doll. It sat in a small rocking chair, tucked into the farthest corner of the attic, as though it were trying to hide or be hidden. Porcelain, delicate, and dressed in a tattered lace gown, it looked like it had been waiting for me. Its glass eyes caught the faint light, staring straight ahead with a lifeless intensity that made my skin crawl. I hesitated, feeling my chest tighten. Something about the doll was wrong, the kind of wrong that wasn't easy to explain. It was as if it were too real, like it could blink at any second, or worse, turn its head. "Don't touch it," a voice whispered, faint and distant. My breath caught, and I whipped around, heart hammering. The attic was empty. Just me, the doll, and the oppressive silence that felt alive. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe the creak of the floorboards. But the whisper had been too clear, too deliberate. Ignoring the lump in my throat, I stepped closer. Each step felt heavier, like the air itself was fighting me. The closer I got, the colder it became, until goosebumps prickled my arms. I crouched in front of the chair, staring into the doll's unblinking eyes. Up close, I noticed cracks in its porcelain face, like tiny spiderwebs radiating from its left eye. Its lips, painted a pale red, were slightly parted, almost as if it had been frozen mid-sentence. I reached out, fingertips trembling, and touched the edge of its lace dress. The fabric was brittle, like it might crumble in my hands. Then the rocking chair moved. It was subtle at first. A faint creak, a slight shift. I jerked my hand back, stumbling away from it. The chair rocked again, more forcefully this time, and the doll tilted forward as though it were about to lunge at me. A high-pitched giggle echoed in the attic, childlike but warped, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the doll. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. My eyes darted around the attic, searching for a hidden speaker, a prankster, anything to explain what was happening. But there was no one. The giggling stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I felt an unnatural weight press down on my chest, like invisible hands were gripping me. Then, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, the mirror across the room. My reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was me, but not me. My face was pale, my eyes hollow and black. The reflection smiled, slow and deliberate, its teeth impossibly sharp. I blinked, and it was gone. Something shifted behind me. A whisper, louder this time, hissed, "You shouldn't have come." I turned, and the doll was no longer in the chair. It was on the floor now, closer to me, too close. its cracked face tilted up, staring straight into mine. For a split second, I thought I saw its lips move. I didn't wait to see what it would say. I ran. My footsteps thundered down the creaking stairs, my breath ragged as I burst into the hallway. The air felt different down here too. Thick, heavy, oppressive. The house wasn't the same anymore. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every corner alive with movement just out of sight. I made it to my room and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My heart pounded as I backed away, staring at the door like it might burst open any second. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that the doll was just an object, nothing more. But then I saw it again. The doll was sitting on my bed. It hadn't been there before. I hadn't brought it with me. And yet, there it was, its head tilted just slightly to the side, its unblinking eyes fixed on me. The whisper returned, louder now, almost a growl. "You can't escape." The lights flickered, and the shadows in the room began to shift, pooling in the corners like liquid. When the darkness swallowed me whole, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was like the room itself had vanished, leaving me suspended in a void. I could still feel the cold biting into my skin and hear the faint echo of my ragged breaths. Somewhere in the silence, I thought I heard a faint hum, like the faint vibration of an old music box winding itself up. Then the light came back, but it wasn't normal. It flickered like the dim, erratic glow of a dying bulb, bathing the room in sickly yellow tones. The doll was gone. My bed, my walls, everything looked the same, but it felt different, wrong. There was a heaviness to the air, an electric charge that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I glanced at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it stayed shut. My breathing slowed just enough for me to hear the faintest sound behind me. A soft shuffling, like porcelain scraping against the wooden floor. I didn't want to turn around. Every part of me screamed not to look, but I had to. The doll was there, standing. Its cracked face tilted slightly upward, as if it were staring directly into my soul. It had moved again, closer this time. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of my desk to steady myself, but the moment my hand touched the wood, it felt warm, too warm. I yanked it back and saw something wet smeared across my palm. It was red, dark red, blood. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest as the shuffling sound grew louder. The doll took a step. Its tiny porcelain foot tapped against the floor with an unnatural weight, like each step carried the force of something far larger, far more menacing. It moved with slow, deliberate intent, never breaking its unblinking gaze. I didn't even realize I was screaming until my throat began to burn. I grabbed a lamp from my desk and hurled it at the doll. The bulb shattered, spraying shards of glass across the floor, but the doll didn't flinch. It didn't stop. It just kept coming, one step at a time. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, like 100 voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They filled the room, weaving around me, growing sharper and angrier with every passing second. The shadows in the corners began to move again, twisting and writhing like living things. I bolted for the door, my fingers fumbling with the lock. The whispers surged into a deafening roar as the knob turned and the door flew open. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. The house was different again, the walls seeming to stretch and shift as though alive. Doors that had once been there were now gone, replaced by endless hallways that seemed to loop back on themselves. As I turned a corner, the air grew colder. My breath came out in short, visible puffs, and the faint sound of a music box drifted toward me. It was the same haunting melody I'd heard before, tinny else. Soft, uneven footsteps, trailing just behind me. I turned a corner and found myself in the dining room. My grandmother's old chandelier swung lazily overhead, its crystals catching the flickering light. The long table was set for dinner, though the plates were chipped and the silverware was tarnished black. At the far end of the table, I saw it. The doll sat upright in a high-backed chair, its tiny hands resting on the tablecloth, its cracked face angled toward me. But it wasn't alone. Seated beside it were more dolls, their porcelain faces just as cracked, their lifeless eyes staring ahead. Some were missing limbs, others had twisted, malformed features, but all of them were watching, waiting. The whispers stopped. The silence was worse. Then the doll at the head of the table tilted its head ever so slightly, and a single word escaped its painted lips. Stay. I froze. My body refused to move. The shadows on the walls began to stretch toward me, pooling like ink across the floor. The chandelier above groaned as its chains strained, and the music box's tune grew louder, faster, discordant. I backed away, but the shadows moved faster, rising up like a wave to engulf me. Just as they reached my feet, I felt something cold wrap around my wrist. I looked down, and there it was, the doll's hand. Its tiny porcelain fingers gripped my arm with an unnatural strength, and its unblinking eyes bored into mine. Stay, it said again, louder this time. Its voice was sharp, hollow, and echoing as though it came from a vast, empty place. I tried to pull free, but its grip tightened. Cracks began to spread across its porcelain skin, revealing something dark and writhing beneath, something alive. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, and the chandelier came crashing down. The room erupted into chaos. Shadows swirled violently, the dolls at the table tumbled to the floor, and the whispers returned, screaming now, a cacophony